Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Future Tech Podcast. It's me, Charlie Sell, the COO for EMEA for Hydrogen Group, where I get a chance to talk to inspirational people who have built or pivoted careers into STEM, who are as passionate as I am about promoting STEM and careers in general to the young people out there today who may be finding it incredibly tough to actually work out how they can get their foot in the door. So I am really, really pleased to have Mike Butterwick with me today. And this is former Brigadier Mike Butterwick CBE, who is someone who's got an inspirational story of how they've built an incredibly successful career in the Army to then now pivot into STEM and working directly for a global service, industrial services business, Altrad UK, which is part of the Altrad Group. He's in the role as the head of talent with some really, really clear missions and purpose and what he wants to help achieve for the group, which again, thinking about the audience of our podcast is truly inspiring as this is a company that's leading the way in wanting to build diversity and really think out the box on how to promote STEM careers to the next generation. So without further ado, Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Charlie, it's fantastic to be here. I mean, it's a lovely introduction that you've given there. I mean, I couldn't be more passionate about what we do here at Altrad, and I've been privileged to do. And as you say, it's a different background that I bring, I think, into this organisation than perhaps hitherto we've done.
Yeah, and I think that would be such a great starting point because, as I say, for the career that you built in the Army, just tell us about your story and then especially how you achieved a CBE through it and how you then pivoted into Altrad.
Yeah, no, indeed. So I did a long time in the Army. I did 33 years. I was a young 19-year-old who was wanted to go to university and then for whatever reason didn't quite make the grades first time round and suddenly had a year off ahead of me. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I thought, well, actually, I'll tell you what, I know that the Army does a gap year scheme. So I went and did a gap year scheme. Luckily, I managed to get the grades, got me into to university thereafter. So I did 6 months with the Army in my gap year and loved it so much I stayed. And 33 years later, I popped out. I was an infantry officer, so I joined an organisation called the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers. That allowed me to serve all over the world, lead soldiers and women, sometimes in very difficult circumstances, as you would expect. But what I found I was most passionate about in the Army was that the Army is a great organisation for developing people. It takes people from whatever background. They might be really highly qualified graduates or completely unqualified school leavers, and we turn them into something better than they came into us with. And some of the jobs that I did in the Army were doing exactly that. So my favourite job of all was to run recruit training for the British Army. I did that through COVID, which was entertaining, I can tell you. But that was all about taking young people and making something really fantastic, really taking them on a journey with themselves about what they could become. So it was a brilliant thing to do. And in fact, actually, to bring it full circle, in the background, Charlie, you can probably see the Beano and the Dandy and the Cure. These aren't my pictures; they're my son's. And the reason I'm in his room is he's away on basic military training, doing the training that I set up a few years ago. But hey, that's probably another story. But you asked about the CBE. Very proud, very nice to have the CBE. It goes back to some work I did in 2014 to 2016, where the Army recognised that it had a real problem with reaching ethnic minority communities in our country. We were not recruiting in those areas, and for some reason there was a disconnect. And so I did some, at the time, very innovative work to try and bridge the gap, to say, look, this is our Army, and this is for everybody in the United Kingdom, no matter your backgrounds, and to build those bridges that enables people to fulfil a career in the Army, no matter what their background was. And it was pretty successful and very privileged to receive a CBE. And I think it's on the back of that I find myself in Altrad. I left the Army after 33 years. It was time for a second career. It was time for me to move on. And what my passion was reaching out, going to parts of society that haven't necessarily considered careers in certain ways, in this instance, STEM careers, and trying to make that connection that actually this is for you, it's for everybody, no matter what your background. And that's the sort of work I'm doing with Altrad.
Wow, fantastic. What a lovely story, because as I can imagine, over those 33 years, you probably saw and did a lot to be able to grow through the ranks. But to have that innate passion for building diversity, and because the army is bigger than most multinational organizations, I can
So yes.
imagine. So to be able to change a culture, or to be able to support the evolving of a culture to become more inclusive, to open up any perceived barriers, I imagine that must be one of the most transferable skills into what you're trying to achieve at Altrad and probably many other businesses.
Yeah, it is. I mean, people get very worried sometimes about this word inclusivity, and people get even more worried about diversity, and they think it's something to be feared. It's something that's about a politically correct crusade or something like that. And of course, it isn't. This is about bringing the potential out of everybody. This is about making sure that no matter what your background or who you are, what skills you bring, you can perform at your very, very best. And you simply can't do that if your organisation is not inclusive. And the analogy I always like to draw, which is totally not my experience, but is the England football team. The England football team was full of stars, wasn't it? In the times when I was watching the England football team, but we never really performed because it was a bunch of individuals. It wasn't inclusive. Everybody was competing with each other. What's happened in the last few years is we've created an environment, a culture where people can be themselves. They can really perform to their very best ability. And whilst we haven't won anything, I recognise that. We've got to the finals and semi-finals of major tournaments in a way that we just didn't for the decades before. But you put that into the army context. The army was an organisation, it's got a purpose. It's there to do the nation's difficult things, fight and win wars on land. That's the army's purpose. Inclusivity? Well, actually, of course it is, because this is about small teams and bringing together people from all sorts of backgrounds and getting together to point in the same direction and do sometimes difficult things. And it's the same for industry. If you think about what Altrad does, Altrad puts highly qualified trades people onto client sites, and that's right across nation's vital infrastructure. So power stations, nuclear power, these are really highly technical places. And if your team is not an inclusive team and people coming into it and not feel as though they belong, then it's not going to perform those vital tasks that we do in a particularly great way. So inclusivity is fundamental to the mission. It was fundamental to the mission in the army. It's fundamental to the mission here in Altrad.
Yeah, and what a great analogy to be able to link the two, because you are right. Inclusivity is more than a tick box exercise. It's a culture. It's a feeling. It's got to be authentic, hasn't it? I think there's a mistake that many companies and maybe many individuals make, that they look at DE&I and the inclusivity part, even the diversity part, as sometimes a tick box exercise, rather than there's commercial and career gain in a company actually understanding the value of it.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
it'd be really interesting to get your thoughts, because what you're trying to achieve for Altrad now, which traditionally was in the industry sector alone, has a certain type of person that joins it, and you're trying to break down those barriers and those beliefs. What have you found have been the quick wins, or the positive steps that you've been able to make to help to break down some maybe limiting beliefs or misconceptions about getting a career in STEM?
Yeah, no, indeed. I mean, the mission is really quite grand. I mean, Altrad is a big organisation. It's a big worldwide global organisation. Within the UK, we employ already 11,000 people, but we're looking to grow. And the reason we're going to grow is there's so much work out there. The industry body we work for, the Engineering Construction Industry Training Board that we work with, they estimate there's 40,000 more jobs required within this sector by 2028. I mean, that's an incredible amount of skilled work that is required by this country to do the sort of projects that we find ourselves working on. It might be the building of new nuclear power station. It might be the energy transition that was so important to all our futures. And Altrad's right in there. But to grow in those sort of numbers, you cannot rely on the traditional recruiting methods that have served us extremely well for many years. So we've got to do things differently, and we've got to reach parts of society that perhaps haven't considered this. So that really is, that's my mission. That's what I'm there to do, and I'm couldn't be more passionate about it. But you asked about quick wins. Well, there's many. I think one of the things that you sort of hint at is, why would anybody think about working in a nuclear power station or working on a power station that they drive past, perhaps on the A1 or something like that. Why would we go and do that? Well, when we break it down to the roles that people are actually doing on those sites and the skills that they have and the start point for most of the people going into those industries, we're not talking about huge amounts of GCSEs and A-levels and degrees. We're talking about people who are really good with their hands, really want to learn a trade and really become masters of those trades. And the career progression that you can have within those trades is quite remarkable. So, you take some of the trades that we have, like welding or pipe fitting or things like this, things which perhaps at school we haven't really come across unless you've done a little bit of design technology or something like that. But these are fantastic trades, which if you've got the aptitude and you've got the finger coordination and you want to do this, what a fantastic thing to get into, to really learn the skills and become really good. And if you do that, you've got a career for the rest of your life. You've got an ability to move around the country, and actually it's extremely well paid as well. And at the other end of the spectrum, of course, absolutely, we want highly qualified graduate engineers who can be the designers of those new sites, the problem solvers of how on earth we're going to do this energy transition and make it work. I mean, really extraordinary problem sets to think about. And again, why would you go into that? Well, as far as I'm concerned, that couldn't be more important. It couldn't be more interesting to go and be the person that is going to help solve those problems. And I think that could appeal to an awful lot of people, particularly, hopefully, your listeners.
Yeah, and I think that's a brilliant answer in regards to being able to look at the entire spectrum of STEM being accessible to people who are incredibly good with their hands, all the way through to people who are passionate about academic and problem solving, and it's an incredibly wide range. And I guess the other side of this, which is also, I think again where many companies get it wrong, is they can sometimes think about diversity simply being about gender or social economic, but there's many types of diversity, isn't there? From neurodiversity to ethnic, like people come in all creeds, all ways, and so I guess you have different streams of different approaches on talent and pools that you're trying to approach based on different ideas for what diversity means.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is traditional diversity. It is a fact that not enough women are going into our STEM careers, and it's something as a nation we need to do something about. At Altrad, we couldn't be more passionate about doing that. Why on earth would we close ourselves off to 51% of our population? We absolutely need women engineers. We need women's tradespeople. And we're trying to create a culture whereby that can thrive. And what do I mean by that? Well, culture is about policies. It's making sure that your policies support and enable women to thrive in our organisation. We have just brought in PPE, so protective equipment fitted for women, rather than putting on the bloke's overalls, which is what we do all the time. I mean, my daughter plays cricket and she constantly has to play in bloke's pads and bloke's gloves and stuff like that. We can do better than that, and we're trying to do that in Altrad. So there's something about the policies that create the culture, and then there's something about making sure that the atmosphere, to use a sort of trendy word, the lived experience of women coming into our organisation is right, and all of us have got to work harder at that. And of course, seeing women progress through our ranks is going to be important. So, we know this sector needs to do more in this area. Absolutely, we're on the front foot, if you like, to try and do something about that. So that's, if you like, traditional diversity, as you said, the gender, the ethnicity parts to that as well. But it is so much more. And I think this is where, if we go back to that conversation that we were having about the sort of engineering and the projects that we're looking at, some of our projects are really fascinating. So the solving of a hydrogen plant in Teesside, or how the energy transition is actually going to work, offshore wind, onshore wind, how we're going to connect that to the grid, and all of these things that we're getting involved in. The way that you get the really great ideas is to have diversity in your team. And the more diverse your teams are, the more inputs, the more different ideas will come to the fore. And as long as we've got the leaders who can embrace the different ideas and really bring out the best in those teams, then I think we're going to be, that's exactly what we tried to do. And if I go back to my previous service as well, that was something the Army suddenly realised that was absolutely key. That diversity is not about the targets that people impose. No, that's important. That representation is always important. Of course it is. It's sometimes how you can measure things. But what really matters is diverse teams to come to different conclusions on difficult problems. With the complexity of the problems that we certainly faced in my previous organisation, it's through diversity that you really get the diverse mindsets to solve those problems. Lots of academic thought on this area. My lived experience is it does work. And again, that's what Altrad's trying to achieve.
Yeah, wow. I think they're already showing their willingness to think out the box by being able to attract people like yourself that comes from different sectors, even that has been able to solve that challenge for other industries, and how relatable, transferable that is.
Yes.
Because that's already a bit of diversity, isn't it, in regards to how you don't necessarily, we were discussing it earlier, gone are the days where you have to follow a very formal, prescribed route into STEM careers specifically. People can now have second, third, fourth careers. I think society embraces the fact, especially for young people, that if you try something and it doesn't work out, you can try something else, because you've got to be able to have that willingness to put yourself out there. And I think when it's companies like Altrad, but many others, you're trying to attract people, I guess there's a voice to say, come and experience it. Come and see what this career could offer you. Similar to what you must have had with the army.
Yeah, definitely. So sometimes there's a bit of courage required, isn't there? You've got to just take that leap. You've got to say, do you know what? I am going to try and do that. And if you're passionate about something, my advice is always follow those passions. So if you're passionate about really doing the real work about solving the nation's problems, energy transition being one of those. If you're really interested in that, if you're one of these engineers that really wants to get into the most knotty problems, then follow that passion and come into the organisation that's going to do that. And obviously I'm biased, but Altrad wants people like that. And the other thing which I love about working for the organisation I now do is that the ability to move between different parts of the business. 1 minute you're working on an onshore on a power station, the next few years you might work in the nuclear sector or perhaps offshore or something like that. So there's a great variety of careers, and I think having that desire to try something new, to move through and follow those passions is a great way to structure a career, particularly in the early days where you're still quite trying to work out what it is you wanted to do. I always used to think when I was in the army that when I grow up, I'll work out what I'm going to do in 33 years later, I'm still in the army.
Oh, fantastic. And so, look, time flies by when I have these conversations, because this has been so interesting. So let's move on to the last part of the podcast, which is this all-important career advice. So when thinking about the young people listening to a podcast, what one or two bits of advice would you give them that would allow them to sort of stand out or improve their chances of getting that foot in the door?
I think the first thing I'd say is don't follow the norm. Don't necessarily think that you have to follow the A levels, you have to follow into a degree. Actually, particularly the people that are out there that perhaps GCSEs didn't go so well, academics, you're not really that particularly interested in all of that. The apprenticeship route is such a great route to learning your trade. It really is. It's particularly great for as I said, for those who just want to be practical and go and do stuff. That's not to say apprenticeships don't have an element of academic learning. Everything has a level of learning. Learning is how we grow, and making sure that we continue to learn is fundamental. But in an apprenticeship, particularly the sort of apprenticeships that we offer in this sector in Altrad, are really sort of trade-based. They're very practical. They're going to give you the skills that can grow. So I think the first thing is don't feel as though you have to go down a tried and tested route, when actually in your heart of hearts, that's not really what you want to do. I saw my own son's journey in that regard. He was surrounded by people going to university. That wasn't what he wanted to do. He wanted to be practical. I wish in many ways that he'd followed that apprenticeship route. He decided on the army, and in the army he's doing his apprenticeship, which is great. He's following his dad's footsteps, I suppose. But what Altrad offers is such a great way to get the sort of the practical route going. And again, on the other hand, if you really do have an academic passion, you really do want to problem solve, then go for it. Go and get your engineering degree. Go and get your highest qualification you can, because absolutely not just Altrad. There's going to be a load of firms out there that absolutely want you to come into their business to help solve the big problems that are ahead. So the message is, if you're practical and not academic, absolutely, let's follow those T levels, apprenticeships, those sort of routes to the practical trade qualifications that you wish. And secondly, if you really are interested in problem solving, you've got a sort of an idea about that, that's what you really love doing, then follow that route that gets you into the engineering professions, the STEM professions like that, the digital professions that the country needs so much of.
Yeah. Mike, thank you. What fantastic career advice to finish the podcast on, because it's, what's resonated with me throughout this entire podcast is how there is truly, accessible. STEM careers are accessible to all, and exactly as you just highlighted in that last bit about whether you're practical and hands-on with apprenticeships, all the way through to problem solving and incredibly academic. That range is there, and it's not one or the other. It's a range, isn't it? You'll find that perfect blend in the middle. So, well, thank you again. As I say, these podcasts always fly by when I speak to such inspirational people. So, on behalf of the podcast, Mike, thank you very much for being a guest.
Yeah, excellent.
And to our listeners, that's another episode of Future Tech. So, as you will know, the podcast is shared with the STEM Ambassador Association. It's on our Spotify channel and also on the Hydrogen website. So, for our listeners, this is another episode of Future Tech, and thank you for tuning in.